Welcome back to the Catholic Buzz, our 10th episode of this podcast. We're so excited to bring you these 10 episodes over the time. Of course, available here on YouTube, online on parish websites, Facebook, and also available on iTunes if you search for the Catholic Buzz podcast. I'm Father Daniele, and joining me always is Josh Sullivan. Josh, happy 10th anniversary.
Hey, thank you. Yeah.
10 episodes already.
I tell you, I think that's the wood anniversary.
Is that the wood?
We're supposed to get something made out of wood. Yeah, I think that's what it is.
That's very kind of boring.
Yeah, I actually have no idea, but it's something. I'm sure it's something in the, depending on the realms that you look at.
And also always joining us, the person who deserves all praise for putting up with me for 10 episodes is Matt Van Milligan. Matt, happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
10 episodes already. Who would have thought?
That's exciting.
10 episodes. I can't believe people want to hear us speak.
Well,
COVID has changed a lot of things.
And the advantage of being kind of a content creator is that you can't really be canceled. So even if they don't,
That's right.
We'll just keep going.
Yeah, we don't want to cancel ourselves.
Yeah.
Just yet. We're still having fun. 10 episodes later. That's 10 weeks. We've been doing an episode every week for 10 weeks. Some of the stuff we've talked about has been really good, and lots of comments, a lot of discussion coming from them as well. Right? I think our very first episode, we talked about confessions. Yeah. Big topic. And then we sort of have been all over the place.
Yeah, I think it's good too. I mean, it's a Catholic buzz, and we hit a lot of the Catholic things right on the head there, right? So we talked about Mary, we talked about suffering, we talked about, those are a lot of things that the outside world sees as the church as using, talking about. So yeah, I think there was a lot going back over the stuff.
Yeah, and thanks to the people who listen and or watch.
Make us feel good.
Yeah, because you've been very good in sending emails and saying, thank you, I never knew this before. Thank you for explaining something I've had a difficulty with understanding. And questions.
Yeah.
And questions and even complaints.
Yeah.
I didn't like the way you explained that or whatever. Mostly directed toward Matt.
Yeah. Well, giving us something to chew on as well. Like that it's nice to be able to have these conversations and get together. And so them giving us an excuse to do so is great. It's
been good to get together and talk about these topics because often that doesn't happen. Like basically we've taken what we do over
beer and wings
and now put it on the internet.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So our 10th anniversary episode, we wanted to do something different because about 5 episodes ago we did a speed round.
Yeah.
Right? And we answered a lot of questions in 2 minutes or less. And we got a lot of good feedback from that because we touched on a lot of topics, and then we got like an influx of questions after that episode. So we thought for the 10th episode, we do speed round part 2.
That's right.
So Josh has the basket.
Put them all in there.
Now remember, before we start, is these questions, some of them require a lengthy response.
That's right.
And we're just going to sort of touch the surface of them in 2 minutes or less. So a lot of them are topics that have to be explored a little further. Yeah. We're just going to really broach the subject.
And it might give people the place to start looking for an answer, right? I mean, it might be in the catechism, but look under this kind of area or whatever.
Yeah, I'm excited to answer the questions because these are questions that people have sent us by email.
Yeah, and even if we don't have the opportunity to answer them adequately here, a lot of these I think could use an episode of their own. So
it gives us
kind of a springboard to jump into that.
So the rules are 2 minutes or less, right?
2 minutes.
Well, last time we really didn't do well there. We talked over 2 minutes. But I think the timer goes off at 1:45. Is that what it is, Josh?
No, I have it on 2 minutes, but I can set it back to a minute.
2 minutes. Okay. And then we'll just wrap it up.
I'll put it at 1:45 so we have it. Yeah. There we go. Okay, 1:45.
We'll wrap it up in air quotes because
yeah,
sometimes wrapping it up takes about 2 minutes.
Yeah, maybe we need like that Oscar music to come on to really help us wrap things up.
We get the audio just turned down to nothing.
Exactly. Maybe our producers behind the cameras can just turn off our mic if we're going too long.
The problem is you see a bunch of bobbing heads, no music, no nothing, just kind of talking because we don't know that we're off.
Okay, so speed round 2. It's our 10th episode. What's the first question?
Okay, here's a start. Here we go. First question. Should children who have not yet received the Eucharist do a spiritual communion? That's a good one.
That is a good one.
It's a tough one because, if they haven't been kind of confirmed, you would expect that degree of preparation to happen.
Yes.
But I think, this is my opinion. This isn't, solid church teaching. That they're still capable of at least reaching towards a spiritual communion or understanding.
Yeah, and just to clarify, spiritual communion is what we've been doing, an active spiritual communion when we can attend Mass. So you say this prayer at the time when you normally receive the Eucharist to desire Christ into your hearts, right? I agree with you. If they're at the age where they're starting to understand what we're celebrating at Mass, then they can pray along the spiritual communion with their parents, right?
Yeah, I think the words of the spiritual communion too, depending on which ones you use, but the ones we use from the words of St. Alphonsus is, if I cannot now receive you in your sacramental presence, come spiritually into my heart. And right there, those words are saying, well, even if it was an outside person that was coming to Mass, maybe in the RCIA program or whatever else, I would probably encourage them to pray that prayer. I can't receive you right now in the sacramental presence, but come spiritually into my heart as if you would by receiving you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's almost like building up some anticipation.
Yeah.
And like really looking forward to the time when you can receive the Eucharist, right? Like building this desire in your heart, right? It would be a good place to educate your children.
Yeah.
It's to start to educate, form them at home.
There's a recognition that he is truly present in the Eucharist. And because I can't receive you, come into my heart as much as you can that way. You know what I mean? I think it's a great opportunity if the kid is old enough to understand the words that they're saying.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, I think that's it.
That's the clock. That's the clock. Okay, ready? So
I think you can kill the timer.
I do have to. Okay, I hit it. Okay, there we go. Okay. Here we go. Who is in control of the diocese if you don't have a bishop?
Oh, very appropriate question for this time. In the Diocese of Sault Ste. Marie right now, obviously, we've been a week without our bishop present. So Bishop Marcel Domfus obviously was reappointed by Pope Francis to be the Archbishop-elect of the new Diocese of Ottawa, Cornwall. So what happens there when a diocese is without a bishop is that the College of Consultors, which is a team of priests who consult the bishop, every diocese has one, they come together when the bishop leaves and they elect an administrator. This only happens if a new bishop hasn't been appointed already for the diocese. Like if the Pope had appointed Bishop Marcel to Ottawa, Cornwall, and appointed us a bishop, this wouldn't be necessary. No. But that wasn't the case. So the College of Consultors gets together and elects among the presbyterate, the priesthood of the Diocese of Sault Ste. Marie, a priest who will be the administrator of the diocese until the time that the Pope appoints a bishop for the diocese.
And they're not ordained a bishop, but they act in the administration role.
Just in the administrative role.
Yeah, acting administrator.
Exactly, the acting administrator. So that's what happens, and that's what's happening here in our diocese. We have an administrator, and we're praying for a new bishop.
Good. Right. That's it?
I think that was a good one, yeah.
I think so. Okay, I have the next question here is something that we answered last time, but I think just need a little more clarification. People with dietary restrictions, are they still obligated to do the fasting or fasting from meat? And in that also comes with, what if you're served meat at a meal that you attend on a Friday? Like,
oh, right, because we talked about the fasting from meat on Fridays.
That's right.
Being a good practice all year round, not just during Lent. Right, so someone's asking if you accidentally, or you're served meat. Let's say you're out for dinner.
Yeah, and you're served meat.
And you're served meat, and you don't want to be like, oh, pardon me, I'm not eating meat today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can't just get new friends.
You can't. Getting new friends is hard in life. Trust me. Yeah, it's very hard.
And one of the wordings too, because there's a couple people that answered, was, is it a sin to eat meat on Fridays during Lent?
Okay, so let's just go there. Absolutely not. Like, it's not sinful if you accidentally eat meat. You forgot it was Friday. You've eaten meat. Yeah. Remember, the Canadian bishops have allowed us to replace that fasting with an act of charity. So if you feel really bad, like, oh, I forgot that today was Friday and I ate this whatever burger,
Yeah.
you know, like replace it with an act of charity would be fine. Now, that is if you're in good health. Anyone who needs medication or in poor health, has medicine or restrictive sort of diets, they're not obligated to do any of that stuff.
No.
Even during Lent, when we say today is a day of fasting,
Yeah.
there's usually an age group in between, and if you're in good health.
I think it's above the age of 16, if I remember correctly, and under 65.
Yeah, under
it's
65.
So
I think
it's somewhere
14
there.
to
You have to look it
65.
up. But yeah, it's just it's 12 to 65, I think. Because my son, 12 to 65?
14,
my kids, 14. Because my kids are still under it. My son's 13. And so I knew it was just past that, because I looked it up this Lent while we went through Lent to see if he would have to do it, or if it's something that we, they still did, like, we give them the option to do it. But
and that's not to say, like, just because you aren't part of that age group doesn't mean you don't have to. Like, if your son feels ready at 13 to do a day of fasting,
of course
he can. He's not obligated to.
Or if you're over the age of 65 and you're healthy enough to do a day of fasting,
Yeah.
you can still
So
do it.
that being said, everything that the church requires of us or asks us to do in a sacrifice like that is in the ordinary circumstances of life.
Yeah.
If you're sick, if you're, not feeling well, you're on medication, you're above a certain age, those aren't required of you.
Yeah.
And if you honestly mess up and make a mistake, that's not going to be held against you. I think that's more fearing the wrong things than it is the purpose of our fasting.
Yeah, and if you look at the purpose of our fasting, the purpose of our fasting is to to strengthen us so that we can use, right, is to strengthen that self-control and be able to put it forward. So, all right.
Good question.
Good question. Okay, here's a big one. I don't know if we'll be able to answer this one. Can you please explain why the church teaches that when a baby is born and dies, could be stillborn or ill or not able to live due to health reasons, that it is said that the baby's soul does not enter heaven due to original sin if the baby is not baptized? So can we answer that question?
Yeah.
The church actually, this is something that the church is, I'm going to start that now, but that's something the church has debated lots, right?
Yeah.
Lots of different theories out there.
That's definitely not a 2-minute question.
No.
So, yeah, when people bring that up, they're normally talking about limbo, which was an aspect of the tradition of the church. But yeah, as Josh said, it was never really formalized as a doctrine of the church. But there have been kind of prominent theologians within the tradition of the church, St. Augustine, who thought that, but also Thomas Aquinas, who didn't think that. And there's been kind of a healthy, robust debate about this throughout the history of the church. And it makes sense because a baby, an unborn child, still carries the mark of original sin. And that's what I think people find the problematic.
And baptism wipes that out.
Yeah. So this is in the exceptional circumstance where, they carry that mark but don't have the option of baptism. And the question becomes whether or not kind of God's mercy extends far enough to that child.
So are we putting God in a box then, right? I mean, God taught us the way to do things and the way to do things properly, but in extraordinary circumstances, are we putting God in a box? God can only save people that are baptized.
So
God extends beyond the sacraments,
exactly.
I guess, right? I think it's really important to note when we're talking about limbo is that it was never something doctrinally taught by the church, something that was taught really in the 20th century, right? Came back in the 20th century. That's why people who are in their 60s, 70s are asking the question.
Limbo.
And still you don't hear from young people about limbo anymore,
no.
Right? You hear people who are taught that when they were going to school in the 60s and the 70s and things like that. So limbo, Pope Benedict came out in 2007, signed a document basically squashing the idea of limbo. And so that kind of came back in the debate at that time. So a baby who dies before baptism, we talked about that in an episode somewhere prior, that there are funeral rites, there are funeral prayers for a baby or a child or a person who has died without baptism. So, and they're prayers for God's mercy, for God's love, to be welcomed into his presence, right? So to say that someone who is not baptized is condemned to a place called limbo where it doesn't, where it's up in the air about their salvation or up in the air, it doesn't sort of, is not what the church teaches. Let's just put it there. That's not what the church teaches at all. That's been the understanding of a few. Pope Benedict, I think, put that to bed. But some will argue, well, then what's the point of baptism?
Yeah.
We're saying at this point, God also can work. He's not restricted by the sacraments.
No.
Yeah.
He taught us to use the sacraments. He showed us how to use the sacraments. He himself was baptized.
Yeah. And just like we're talking about all the time about ordinary and extraordinary, in the ordinary case, a child is born, you have that child baptized, the person grows up and has a lengthy life.
Mm-hmm.
In an extraordinary case where a baby only survives a few hours or is born stillborn, that's an extraordinary case, and God works in extraordinary ways.
Cool.
That was probably 5 minutes.
That was over, but that's a big one. I knew that wasn't going to be right on.
I hope that's a satisfactory answer, because I would.
It's
I would
even
hate,
deeper. I mean, this has been years debated, right? And people have written philosophy papers on this and their PhD papers on this, and this is not like an easy 2-minute answer.
But I would hate for someone to feel like, if they've had that unfortunate experience where they've lost a child, that child is no longer anywhere near God, right? Because that's not what we believe at all.
No. Yeah. Okay, going from that to something a little different, but do we know who Mary's parents were? What does her ancestral family tree look like? And did she have any brothers and sisters? And therefore, did Jesus have any cousins? And did Mary die on earth and then assumed into heaven, or did the assumption occur while she was living?
That's a lot of questions.
I know it's a lot of
To
questions.
answer 7
Yeah.
questions.
So let's say, do we know who the Virgin Mary's parents were, and what did her ancestral tree look like?
So Mary's parents, easy answer, Saint Anne and Saint Joachim.
Yeah.
They are Mary's parents and Jesus' grandparents. Mm-hmm. Now, they are canonized saints of the church, Saint Anne and Saint Joachim. We celebrate their feast day in the calendar of the saints. And they had difficulties in bearing a child. They were gifted the gift of the Virgin Mary. And Matt, I'm not 100% here, but 99.9% sure, that was their only child. Mary was their only child.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Okay.
You have to remember that too. I think in some of this too is like there's a lot of detailed, the Jewish people, they had detailed people who worked in the temple and who were priests and all that stuff. So they had detailed ancestral
records.
Records to say who did what. We know that there's a couple things we talked about before. The words for brother and sister aren't universal. I mean, they're universal for like male relative, right? Mm-hmm. We talked about that with Jesus in another episode, and for Mary. So we know that Mary had a cousin Elizabeth, and we know that there were family around Mary,
for sure,
especially that she can go and stay with and everything else. But exactly her tree. One of the cool things that I thought about is in a Bible reading one time, a Bible thing was there is 2 chains of Jesus, bringing Jesus's ancestral tree back to David. And they had them both in 2 different Gospels, and they're different. And so you look, now there's certain explanations for that. One of them is that it's the record of Joseph and Mary. Mm-hmm. That was one understanding. And then the other understanding is normally it would be through the Father, so maybe it's through Mary and then the Father. So anyways, there's lots of records out there, but in the Bible specifically, there's 2.
Right. And I know that's the bell, but the other question,
I
think
we'll give another minute until. So okay, do you want me to answer
the
that
last
one?
question there about Mary?
Did she die on earth?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did she die on earth and was then assumed into heaven, or did the assumption occur when she was living? I'll give it a minute. 45. Go for it.
Another minute and 45.
Yeah.
So the feast of Mary being assumed into heaven used to be called the Dormition of Mary, meaning she came into a sleep. She fell asleep on earth and was assumed into heaven, right? We celebrate that feast of Mary, the Assumption. So did Mary die here on earth? Did she fall asleep? Those have always been kind of debated here, but our belief is that the body and soul of Mary was assumed into heaven.
So she's not buried here on earth.
She's not buried here.
There's no Mary tomb or something.
Right.
Yeah. The only thing I would add there is that in the Eastern, the Byzantine Church, they still refer to it as the Dormition of Mary, and there's no conflict, or there's no kind of theological conflict between that understanding and our understanding of the Assumption.
Right.
You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. I heard too, and this is just something I heard, so I don't know exactly how true, but in the Muslim tradition, in the Muslim faith, there are beliefs, like they have a high respect for Mary. And in theirs too, they talk about, somewhere in there talked about her Assumption. And there was actually a place where they actually had, there is a believed to be a relic of Mary and stuff. The Catholic Church hasn't weighed in on it, I don't believe. But there was somebody that was Muslim that was talking to me about how they have this tie to the Catholic Church, or the Christian Church, I should say, through Mary. Even though there's a lot of other different beliefs there, but one of them is through Mary and who they believe Mary was, and that she was, I believe that she was assumed into heaven as well. So they believe that part of it. They might not believe everything else.
Yeah. Good questions.
Yeah. Okay. Next one. Sorry. Take that off. All right. Ooh. Okay. What is humanity's salvation dependent upon, and the Church's role in it? Matt?
Another 2-minute question.
Can you just repeat that again?
Yeah. This is a bite and chew question. What is humanity's salvation dependent upon, and the Church's role in it?
What is humanity's salvation dependent upon?
Okay. So there are a number of kind of perspectives that I would imagine people can ask that question from. My own asking that question in a Protestant context initially, you're talking about something like sola fide, in like faith alone, is what you're
faith
is
versus works.
Yeah, the Protestant salvation theology, and faith versus works, grace alone. Grace alone. There's a lot of alones in Protestant theology, which is hard to grapple with sometimes. But that the idea, and at least kind of my trajectory here, is that there's actually not a huge degree of difference between the idea of faith alone. We believe that faith is how our salvation is arrived at. We also believe that we're required to work out our salvation, that faith without works is dead, that the Church and the Church's role in history and the Church's kind of direct role in administering the sacraments is to aid us in doing that spiritual work. So where does our salvation come from? It comes from faith, but that faith is manifest in works. Mm-hmm. And the Church, the Church.
And the Church assists us because it's
and we need the Church.
We need the Church to help us
in place. Yeah, it's
that was a tough question.
Good answer.
But and you did that in 2 minutes. Can you stick around
a little bit longer? Okay, I got our next question. That's a good one. And let's just preference that with that question, real deep. That could be a whole episode on its own.
We could talk forever about that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so next question. Could you please discuss the point of Last Rites and the Sacrament of the Sick? Because there's confusion due to the Church's changes. So
okay, so confusion due to Church's changes.
That's
I don't
what
know.
It says.
I'm confused about that part of it, but I definitely understand that there's some confusion around those sacraments because people still phone a priest for what they call the Last Rites.
The sacrament.
The sacrament of the Last Rites.
It's not a sacrament.
And really what the Last Rites really are a bunch of things near the end of someone's life to aid them to go to heaven. So there's Last Rites. There's a number of things that happen there. So in the Sacrament of the Sick, when the Sacrament of the Sick is administered correctly, obviously it's a healing sacrament. So that heals people physically and spiritually. Mm-hmm. So sometimes when someone's on their deathbed, to be anointed by a priest is to aid them spiritually to go into heaven. Part of that too is confession. Mm-hmm. Confession and viaticum, which is receiving the Eucharist the last time you receive the Eucharist on earth. Mm-hmm. It's sort of to send you on your way.
Cool.
Right? As you move from this world to the Lord's world. And so those things are all part of what's known as the Last Rites. So I think just in common language, people call them the Last Rites, but there's no sacrament called the Last Rites.
That's right.
What's really cool is me as a priest, when I go to administer the sacrament to someone on their deathbed, let's say, the Church allows for what's called the Apostolic Pardon. And that is a prayer to absolve someone of all their sins that they have been unable to confess because of their illness, because of their situation. Maybe an accident has happened. Maybe someone's just on their deathbed and can't communicate. And I hope priests use that generously.
Mm-hmm.
I always use it. I explain it to families, what we're doing. And it opens the gates of heaven to someone who may have unresolved sins on their heart or soul, right? And so that's what I use as part of the final time I see someone before they pass away. So there is a difference. Someone can, and one more thing, I know the bell went, but the sacrament of the sick, people think they can only receive on their deathbed.
No.
Like it's a last rite.
Yeah.
But the sacrament of the sick should be used generously in your life, anytime you're sick. I tell people that physically sick, spiritually sick, mentally sick, emotionally sick, are times when we need the Holy Spirit to heal us. And that's what the sacrament of anointing is. James says, call for the priests, get them to anoint you with oil. It's right in the scriptures. Get them to anoint you with oil. So call for the priests, get them to anoint you when you're feeling sick. Sometimes there's funny stories of, a family member saying, can you go see my mom? She's in the hospital. And the priest walks in and the mom freaks out because she thinks she's dying.
It's not what it's for.
It's for healing, physically and spiritually. And me as a priest who have witnessed people really heal from receiving that sacrament, thanks be to God for that. Yeah.
Can I just ask one quick question
on
that? Last rites. Can you receive it before you're technically on your deathbed?
So I would administer the last rites in the danger of dying.
That's right. Okay. Yeah.
So if someone tells me, "Oh, Father, the doc says I'm getting out on Friday,"
no, yeah,
I would not administer all these.
You could give them the sacrament,
but
sick,
I would
the
definitely
Eucharist.
Pray with them, offer the sacrament sick, bring the Eucharist for sure, confession if they wanted it. I wouldn't give the Apostolic Pardon at that point. Yeah.
Okay, so that you could. I mean, specifically when you're looking like you're about to pass. Sometime in the next few days or something. I mean,
for sure. And if I may, one more thing is families usually call a priest when it's way too late. The doctor says you better say your goodbyes now. Yeah. And then they call a priest. When someone's been in the hospital for days, weeks, months, call. Let's let God act in their life. If it's weeks, as soon as someone gets to the hospital, call a priest. Call someone to pray for you and those sort of things.
Okay. Good.
Sorry.
No, we're good. Here's the next one. All right. So I'm noticing it because Matt was introduced as gluten-free. But just clarification there, Matt's not gluten-free. Father was bugging him. He's actually a sandwich king. If you need a sandwich made,
Matt does make delicious sandwiches.
That's right.
Yeah.
But frankly, it's always left me a little puzzled. Transubstantiation is when the element changes into the body and blood of Christ, and only the appearance remains the same. Why then would a celiac, especially with severe gluten allergies, almost deadly, not be able to partake in the Eucharist? Also, I've heard that some Catholic churches offer less gluten alternatives, although not completely gluten-free, for those who can't handle gluten. There's seemingly acknowledgement that there is gluten in the host.
Right.
And so they're saying, I guess, that the bread is still there, but how do we explain that? It's supposed to be the body and blood of Christ.
Right. Okay, so we have 3 minutes left of this episode.
Yeah.
So this will be the last question, and we'll try and answer the best. I think the question says, if the substance is changed from bread and wine into the body and blood of Jesus, except for just the appearance of bread and wine, why does it matter that there's gluten in the host?
Yeah.
Right? Is that the question? Yeah. Because, Matt, a simple answer is because it has to be bread first. It has to be bread, has to be wine.
Yes.
We couldn't use cranberry juice and rice cakes.
Exactly. The substance of what transubstantiation happens to matters. The matter matters. It needs to be that substance first, and it takes on the substance of the actual body and the actual blood of Christ.
Yeah,
we've blown our entire time budget reading the question.
Yes.
But
So it's essentially both.
It maintains both substances. The explanation of that goes into Thomas Aquinas and detailed like medieval philosophy, which we don't have time for, but that is the short answer.
That's true. There is a whole subject around substance and the accidents of bread and wine and all those different things. That's a real philosophical question that if someone wants to look into it, they can, right? Maybe we can talk about it in another episode. But yeah, the bread we use for the Eucharist has to be unleavened bread, right? There's no yeast in it, following the tradition of what Jesus used himself. So there was a time in the 80s, I think, when people would bake bread before Mass and use it for the Eucharist. That's illicit and not right to use. It has to be unleavened bread, water and flour.
Wheat.
Water and flour. Yeah. That's it. So there's where your gluten comes from. Now, one more thing before we go. I know I'm the one that said that we had time, but low gluten. You cannot have gluten-free hosts.
No.
It has to be low gluten. The church offers low gluten. I think it's 0.00025%, because that's the lowest it can have before it's not bread anymore.
So for those that are gluten intolerant, that prefer not to have gluten, or that can have it. But for a celiac who, if they have even a couple molecules of gluten in their system, it could cause major problems. What is their alternative?
They can drink the precious blood.
They
can make alternatives to just have a chalice just for them. No one else touches it. No one else drinks from it. They drink from the precious blood. You can make that arrangement with your priest at your parish if you can't even have the low gluten host.
Okay, so just one last question then. Do you have to receive the host, or can you receive, I mean, I think you're already answering that, but the blood is okay to receive. I mean, you don't have to receive it under both or one or the other.
Right. Jesus is present, body, blood, soul, and divinity in both the host and in the chalice. So you can just receive one. It's not like if you don't receive both, you're not receiving the fullness of Jesus.
Perfect.
Right.
Okay.
Whew. Okay. That was a good speed round. We're way over time. And that's it for our 10th episode.
Wow.
I know. We're moving into our next decade. I know it's been 10 episodes, and you see me on camera all the time, and Josh on camera, and Matt on camera. But there's two people who work behind the scenes. They're Dave Dunkley and Kevin Yarosh. They do awesome work for us behind the scenes. So we want to thank them, because this 10 episodes wouldn't be possible without their help too, even though you don't get to see them on camera. Okay, so happy anniversary to them too, and thank you for all your work too. Josh, happy anniversary.
Thank
Matt,
you.
Happy anniversary. I'm Father Daniele. We'll see you next time on the Catholic Buzz. Oh, and send us your comments, questions, concerns, whatever you want at thecatholicbuzzpodcast@gmail.com. See you later.